Hello there, how are you doing? Welcome to my luxury cupboard somewhere in an undisclosed location in Hong Kong, which I call I guess, my study or office, but actually it's the only room in my apartment that doesn't have records in it. Amusingly, though, it is then filled with other physical media like books, video games, bits of computers, lots of video game consoles, tech, old gaming mice. For some reason, I've got two internet routers in here. Actually, it's because I have two different wireless networks. But let's not go into that. That's not important. Hope you are doing well. Now, I want to talk today about a couple of things. The main thing I'm going to talk about is crypto regulation in Hong Kong, because there's lots of people saying, oh, now it's coming. We now have something that's a law that's coming into force, amendments to an existing law. This is the beginning of crypto being regulated like it will be in China, which I don't think is true. And I'll explain why. But I also want to talk about what's been happening in Hong Kong from a tech perspective with COVID. Now, COVID, it's so 2020, 2021, isn't it? But here in Hong Kong, even though it is what? July 2022, my calendar is down there, by the way. Even though it is July 2022, we are still living with what they call dynamic zero COVID. Nobody really knows what that means. I don't think any of the people in charge really do either. We're not the same as mainland China in that they're locking down entire districts there, or if you're in Macau, they've locked down most of Macau for the last week and a half. They're not essentially going after people and barricading them in their apartments or breaking into their apartments to make sure they're not close contacts. But we do have regulations in place. It is very difficult to get in and out of Hong Kong still. If you want to go into Hong Kong, you still have to do 7 days quarantine in a hotel designated by the government that you pay for, and do umpteen PCR tests, and possibly catch COVID in the quarantine hotel. And if you do catch COVID, heaven forbid, you may be then sent to a community isolation facility, which could be okay, could be an absolute nightmare. We are still just not doing a great job of it, and most people here are sick of it if they haven't already left. But there we go. But there's a tech element to it now. The government announced about a week and a half ago that they would introduce a health code system here in Hong Kong. This is a system where you'll take your phone, you'll use your phone, you have to carry it with you at all times, and it will track on your phone whether you have COVID, whether you've been exposed to COVID or a close contact with someone with COVID, or whether you're perfectly healthy. And it will give you a traffic light system colour to decide whether or not you can go to places. So green, you have the freedom of Hong Kong, though if you want to leave and come back in, it's a bit of a faff. If it's amber, there'll be some restrictions on where you can go and what you can do. You won't be able to go to bars and restaurants, is the most obvious example. Red, you have to isolate. You probably aren't allowed to go out. And if they know that you've got COVID, they'll probably give you a tracking wristband as well. And, the principle behind that's fine. Tracking apps, nothing new. Problem is, it sounds very similar to the system that is in the mainland. And in the mainland, they've been using the health code system, which they've had for a long time, and it works in terms of it tracks you. It uses GPS to monitor where you're going. So if you walk past a place where there's a COVID outbreak, you may find you go amber or red, then you have to isolate. But people have also noticed that when they are planning to do something the government doesn't like, most notably recently, some of the banks have been struggling in China, and they were freezing accounts, not allowing people to make withdrawals. When a bunch of customers of the bank decided they wanted to go and protest, all of their health codes mysteriously went red. So the concern is that it will be used the same way in Hong Kong. It will be used to clamp down on whatever the government doesn't like. Now, the government has repeatedly gone out of its way to say your code will not go red for no reason. But unfortunately, generally when the government says something, people believe the opposite here. It's got that way. They've also said that the health code system will only affect a small number of, a tiny minority of people, I think they said, which is exactly what they said about the national security law. But then when that came out, that turned out to be applicable to everybody in the entire world. So we'll see. It's hard to believe that we are still going through all of this nonsense. Tracking apps are so early 2020, and I kind of hope that Hong Kong just stops losing its mind at some point and things go back to normal. But although it's tech related and the technology behind it is interesting, and there's a lot of privacy concerns along with that, but we've talked about those before, and I've done an entire video on tracking apps way back in 2020. What I want to talk about is the suggestion that cryptocurrency is going to be regulated. Now, lots of people are saying the law's now changed. There's an amendment to the anti-money laundering laws here in Hong Kong, which means from now on, crypto is regulated. It is not. What has actually happened is that they are regulating exchanges. They are regulating what they call virtual asset service providers. Now, this is someone who essentially provides a means of buying and selling, essentially an exchange, a crypto exchange, any virtual asset. And a virtual asset is essentially described as, I'll have to read a little bit from the screen on this one, it's a unit of account or a store of economic value which functions or is intended to function as a medium of exchange accepted by the public as payment for goods or services or discharge of a debt or investment purposes, and it will be transferred, stored or traded electronically. Now, this catches all, let's be honest, all cryptocurrencies. There's an argument that maybe a stable coin, if it's linked to a fiat currency, that wouldn't be caught. No, that is captured by it as well. It will actually capture some things like in-game assets where you can buy and sell things in a video game for cash, and they could be traded electronically. It would probably cover those. That's a little bit shaky at the moment. We'll have to see how that's affected. They have said at the moment it doesn't affect NFTs because NFTs are non-fungible. We will see. At the moment it doesn't, but I can see NFT marketplaces being subject to this in the future, because let's be honest, NFTs are particularly the high value ones, are used more as a medium of financial exchange these days than someone saying, look at my brilliant virtual picture. But there we go. Now, if you want to essentially set up an exchange, you can only then deal with private investors. The other issue you've got is if you're then doing that, you need to get a license, and you'll be licensed. You'll then be subject to the remits of the SFC, the Securities and Futures Commission, and there's various things you need to do. The most obvious thing you need to do, and the biggest thing, and I think the reason behind this change, is that you have to comply with anti-money laundering legislation. And indeed, the change to the law is an amendment to the anti-money laundering legislation. So you have to comply with that, and that will then require you, if you are a virtual asset exchange, to get a virtual asset service provider license, a license essentially to operate in such a manner. And you know what? I'm not really that bothered about this. It sounds like it's going to be a really onerous thing, but any business really in Hong Kong that operates in the financial space, and crypto does, let's be perfectly honest, does tend to need a license here. So if you are a money operator, if you operate a bureau de change, they call them here? I assume they do. That was some terrible French. You would need a money services license, money service operator license. I may get some of this wrong, so don't quote me on any of this. If you are selling stored value cards, you need a stored value facility license, and you will have rules related to that. If you're a telecoms provider that then allows stored top up and you can use credits, you will need a license to do that. And the vast majority of this comes down to regulating money laundering, making sure that people aren't using these things to do something bad with illegitimate funds. Hong Kong traditionally has had a reputation as a great place for people to come down from China, launder their money and send it to the rest of the world. I don't know whether that's justified. I've never really seen people with suitcases of cash walking around and then taking them to banks. But let's be honest, I suppose they probably wouldn't make themselves known if they were doing so. I have seen people withdrawing vast amounts of money from ATMs and putting them in bags. So maybe. And I wasn't involved in any sort of bank robbery. I was just waiting to get some money out. I was very annoyed they were taking so long. But this is what the law's aimed at. So if you're going to operate as a crypto exchange that is based in Hong Kong, or a virtual asset exchange that is based in Hong Kong or is marketing to Hong Kong, you need to get a license. And to obtain a license, you'll have to do them through various hoops. I don't think it will be particularly onerous. I've seen the application for licenses in terms of money operators, and indeed in terms of telecoms operators even here in Hong Kong. And yeah, it can be a bit of a drawn out process, but it isn't a massive hurdle. Interestingly, you would need this even if you're not based in Hong Kong, you're trying to operate in Hong Kong, so if you're actively marked in Hong Kong. But ultimately, again, not the big regulation of crypto, and it's certainly not a sudden regulation of stable coins, a sudden control of how cryptocurrency is used. So I don't think it's actually anything to get excited about. I do think two things really. One, I think that it's pointless in terms of actually regulating crypto. I mean, I appreciate that the government needs to do what it does in terms of compliance with anti-money laundering obligations, and I think that's a good move. But as we all know, crypto has no borders. Crypto exchanges are all over the world. It doesn't really matter who you want to trade with. Hong Kong is very, very technology and investor savvy, and if people want to get around a regulation and use a cryptocurrency provider that isn't in Hong Kong, they will find a way to do it. So it kind of is toothless. What will be interesting is whether some of the exchanges think, stuff this, we're just not going to market in Hong Kong, we're going to move out of Hong Kong. We saw that when China regulated crypto. I mean, do you remember that? I remember being in a taxi, going to see some friends on a Friday evening, and I got a phone call. It must have been maybe 2020. I've lost all track of time. And they said, you won't believe it, China has just banned crypto. And I said, that isn't possible. There's been no suggestion that this is coming in. There's been no law passed, no regulation. And it was just the People's Bank of China said, that's it. They imposed criminal penalties. When that happened, people did move out of Hong Kong. A lot of the exchanges, a lot of the people who are investing or trading crypto decided to go. They moved to other countries with less regulation. We may see that with this requirement to get a license, but again, I don't really think so. I think it's one of those things where this is a bit of a storm in a teacup. Now, what I do think we will see, Hong Kong is interesting in that it's a very much a free market for investors, and I'm not a finance person, I'm a tech person, but if you want to invest in something, it's generally fine until it isn't. And it tends to be the case that it isn't once people get ripped off. And I feel if more people lose money in terms of investing in crypto, or if there's a big scandal investing in crypto, we've had it with insurance products where they got regulated when people were annoyed that essentially they were being ripped off and sold products that weren't very good, and boom, they were regulated. We may see it, and I expected to see it in stablecoin in that respect, but I don't think the losses were big enough or were not something that would cause some sort of societal dysfunction. But you may see crypto regulation at that point. You may also see, if China decides they're going to put some of their laws into Hong Kong, and they've said that they won't, they're saying one country, two systems continues, that we do get an absolute ban on crypto at some point. But at the moment, I think it's a storm in a teacup, and Hong Kong still remains a place where investment in crypto, and particularly the use of NFTs, I mean, I feel like the rest of the world has moved on NFTs now, but Hong Kong, we've got ads everywhere for NFTs to this day. I was going through just the other day, I was like, why are all these posters now trying to get you to invest in Hertz NFT with some funky pictures that look very similar to CryptoPunks but aren't? But that's still a big market. It's very much seen as a way of investment, and let's face it, there's no better investment than pictures of cats that you don't actually own. But there we go, that's it for the moment. Don't get too excited about the regulation of crypto in Hong Kong. It is really just a licensing regime. It's just to stop people using money for nefarious purposes. We may see something in the future, but I don't think it's going to be quick on coming. I think we'll get other crazy things like health code apps, or a new anti-terrorist law or something on those lines. That seems to be the profile at the moment. We may also see changes I've discussed before in my last video, in fact, to the data privacy laws. I think they are more likely to be forthcoming. But if you want to find out more about virtual assets and essentially how the licensing regime will work and what a virtual asset service provider must do, by all means drop me a line, get in touch. I'm happy to do a video on their obligations if people want something in more detail. But that is it for now. Hope you are doing well. I will be back before you know it. I'm actually doing a couple of, if you're watching this just as it goes out, which is, as I said, just the tail end of July, I'm speaking at a big South China Morning Post conference on the digitization and the future of Hong Kong in relation to digitization. And I have a few speaking events going on. But then, when I get to the summer, I am actually going to try and leave Hong Kong for a little while and travel around the world. So if I have got the technology, which I hopefully have, I will do some videos from that. I'll be looking at technology in different parts of both Europe and indeed in the US. I'm doing a big old trip. And also, it'll be my first time out of Hong Kong for nearly 3 years. How scary is that? But anyway, have a good one. I'll see you soon. Take care.